Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today I want to talk to you guys about my bold predictions for the Jacksonville Jaguars this year as we are getting ready for the kickoff of the NFL season. We've got Lions and Chiefs tonight. Should be a really good game, a lot of big storylines, but before that happens, I want to make sure we get this video out and make our claims and our predictions before the season starts, because it's easy to say what's going to happen after it starts happening. But I'll lead this with this. I'm a homer. I think the Jaguars are going to be great this year, and it's really hard for me to pick against them. But I also, I'm probably going to have a lot of things I'm going to say that are going to be very favorable for Jacksonville. I do stand by those things. Because as a fan, and I think a lot of you guys also feel this way, and maybe you want to 100% agree. If you're a fan in 1999, I wasn't even born then. But because 1999 was such a good year for the Jaguars up until the very end, I think that this is the best Jaguars team I have ever seen in my life. I think it's that by far. I think they're going to have an absolutely fantastic season, and I think they're for real. And everyone wants to predict their team to go all the way and to win the Super Bowl. I think this team legitimately has what it takes, and I think that they can get it done. But before I spoil any more, I do want to go ahead. I want to jump into this. I've got 9 different predictions. Some of them aren't that bold. They're kind of popular ones, but I still think as far as the entire NFL and looking at the whole picture, they are still pretty bold predictions. And then I've got some I hope are a little different, not stuff you hear every day. So let us go ahead and get started here. So first prediction for the day. I believe that this season that Christian Kirk is not going to be the number 2 receiver. And it's not saying he's going to be above Calvin Ridley, but I think he is going to come extremely close to Ridley's production. I think it's going to be in different ways than what Ridley does. So I would call Christian Kirk a 1B this season. And I think as a receiver, regardless of who's around him, I think that's the kind of guy he is. I don't think he's at the level of, say, an A.J. Brown or of a Stephon Diggs, but he's right below that as a player, because you look at what he did last year, 1,100 yards. He was second the entire season in red zone production in terms of getting touchdowns. Like, this guy is an extremely productive player, and that was his first year in this system. And now you bring in Calvin Ridley, who is the 1A, who is the top receiver, barring something going wrong this year. He's going to open things up. He's going to take the attention off Kirk. Kirk is going to see more favorable matchups. He's going to be in a better position with this team. And it would not shock me this year if you see Calvin Ridley struggle a little bit early on. I don't think he's going to be bad, but I think you could see him maybe be a little slower than what people want. You could see Christian Kirk take a lead in production this season. And then towards the end, you see Ridley kind of take off, start having those dominant performances week by week, and then beat him by, 100, 200 yards. But what I will say, as far as what I think Christian Kirk is going to do better this season, I think he is going to have more production in the red zone. I think he's going to be leading the team in touchdowns, as far as anyone is not a quarterback, obviously. And I think he's going to do that by a decent margin. I think he's that kind of guy. We saw it again in the preseason in the Dallas game. He was the target for the Jaguars. And we didn't see Ridley have dominant performances then when he was on the field. I think he's going to take time to get acclimated. I still think he's going to have a big impact. I think he's going to have big plays. I think he's going to change momentum. But I think it'll be a little bit before he's just constantly being targeted throughout games. And that will happen eventually. But I think Christian Kirk's, I think he's going to be right there with him. I think he's going to have a very dominant year. If you're playing fantasy football, if you pick Christian Kirk, I think you're going to be pretty dang happy with it as well. Now, we'll go ahead. We'll move on to our second prediction here. We'll swap sides. So I want to talk a little bit about the defense. And so it's a very interesting unit this year because a lot of people who aren't fans just kind of look at it like, they're not that good. How are they going to get better? What did they do to invest on the defensive side of the ball this offseason? I mean, the truth is they did almost nothing until, the 4th round? But at the same time, Jacksonville's in kind of a different situation than most of their teams because on the defensive side of the ball, they have a lot of players that are young, a lot of players that have a lot of potential, but just didn't live up to that last year. You had some guys break out. You had Tyson Campbell, for example. Andre Cisco is another one. I think those players definitely broke out. And you have some veterans who just continued to be really good or had some of their best seasons later on. One guy who was great all year was Foye Oluokun at corner. You've got Darius Williams who came in, didn't have a great start, but when they put him outside like we were all clamoring for all season, he was productive in that spot. And he was a shutdown corner. Don't get it wrong. If you go look at the stats, he was great for the Jaguars last year. And you got him playing as your number 2 across from Tyson Campbell. That's great for the Jaguars. So they're going to improve upon those things. I have a hard time believing they're going to digress or get worse as a team. And the most prominent area I think you'll be able to see this is on the defensive line. So this last year, I'm kind of saying this off the top of my head. I don't know the exact numbers. I believe Allen and Walker combined had roughly like 10 or 11 sacks throughout the year. Walker had 3.5. I think Josh Allen had 7. So it's not a lot of production. You obviously want to get a lot more. Now, for both of them, the story is a lot bigger than that because both of them are great in run support, especially Trayvon Walker. And Josh Allen does a lot more with pressures and just production outside of sacks. The example I bring up most often when talking about it is when you watch the Ravens game because you saw plays where you have like one in the red zone where Josh Allen's running down Lamar Jackson. If he's not getting pressure, Lamar Jackson's completing the throw for a touchdown. And Jacksonville's not going to win that game at that point. So you're talking about coming out of the bye, losing against Baltimore, and then losing against Detroit. And the season's pretty much about over then because you're, I think, 3-9 at that point. So just something to point out with Josh Allen. Like, both these guys, too, as well. But they're both productive. They both do things outside of getting sacks. But I think they're going to start breaking through on that front. I think you saw from Trayvon Walker, he's starting to implement more moves, being a little more productive. And if he can start to step it up, it's going to help Allen, and vice versa. And for Josh Allen, why I think he will be more productive is because 2 reasons. 1, it's a contract year, and 2, look at the contracts being signed. The other guy that he was drafted, I think right behind, not too far after, was Nick Bosa. And Nick Bosa, if you've been following the news at all, just got one of the biggest deals in NFL history. $34 million as an edge rusher. It's the most ever at the position. It blows what Chris Jones was asking for out of the water. And Josh Allen, when he came out, was thought to be maybe a step behind Nick Bosa. And obviously, careers have gone very different. But if Josh Allen this season can step up and go after a double-digit sack season, go get, 12 to 15 on the year, and just be a better player overall, you could see him go out and earn a contract next year where he's getting upwards of $20 million. And for him, I mean, that's a big deal. You're paying for your family's future, your own future, and this is the season that's going to impact it the most. So I think that Josh Allen is going to have a more productive year. I think he absolutely has to. So expect more from these guys. And at the end of the day, I don't know if Walker makes it to 10, but I think Allen's going to surpass it a little bit. And I think they're going to come together and get around 20 sacks on the season. So let's now move on. And we're going to talk a bit about the offensive line. We got a couple different things to talk about here. And so I think when you look at the tackle position, and this has become a lot more clear recently, and maybe early in the offseason we would have thought there's no way they love Cam Robinson, they're not moving on from him. As much as we saw that's probably a good move to move on from him, and they had the option to, the way they set up the contract, that just didn't seem like the way the Jaguars were going to go. But things have changed drastically since that point. You talk about right before the draft, the team did know well before that Robinson was going to get suspended, but that was revealed to the public, I think, the morning of the draft. So you have availability issues there. He was injured last year. He didn't play a whole lot greater than he did on his rookie contract. And you go into the draft and you get a guy like Anton Harrison, who's a great fit for your scheme. He's very similar to what Jawan Taylor offered. as a pass protector, he's really great. I mean, you saw it in preseason, in training camp. He can play at a really high level, and he's got to work on the run blocking side. But that you can work with. And Anton, as a first round pick and someone who's impressed so far, he's going to start on the team one way or another. That's just going to happen. And on the other side of the offensive line, you have a player who, for one, has been available, two, has performed well every time he's come in, and three, is significantly cheaper than Cam Robinson. And that's an understatement because Cam Robinson's earning $17 million a year on his contract, while Walker Little for this year and the next is going to be roughly $1 million, maybe a little more, because he's on his rookie deal. He's only halfway through it at this point. So it makes more sense for Jacksonville at a very high costing position like the offensive tackle to stick with your young guys, especially when I think you can pretty easily argue right now that the young guys have outperformed Cam Robinson. I don't think Cam Robinson is clearly a starter on this team. I think there's a good chance that they do try to insert him back into the lineup as a starter when he comes back. But I just don't think it's going to stick that long if they even do that. I think that Little's going to take this opportunity. I think he's going to play big. I think he's going to play good. And I think that it's going to be very clear, if not already at this point, because you could argue this is very clear already. I think it's going to be very clear that the Jaguars have their two long-term tackles and the guys that they have right now, and they're not just average guys. I think Walker Little can play at a high level, and I think Harrison's going to be a really good prospect. So it's exciting to see that. It was a shocking pick, at the time, but it's one that made sense, especially when you look at what Doug Peterson's done before at that position. But we will continue here, talk a little bit about Cam Robinson, because I think the other side of this, and we kind of hinted at it, is that Cam Robinson is probably going to move on from this team at some point by next season. And I think what's going to happen is that he's going to be moved at the trade deadline. And there's multiple reasons why I believe this. Because, for one, I do believe that Cam Robinson is both tradable, and I think he's going to be valuable to other teams at this point. Even if he has not earned the starting role with the Jaguars when he comes back, he has still been a starter his entire career. He has still played at a decent level. He's been an average starter at left tackle, a position that is very hard to get players to perform at. And a team, say, like Miami, that has Teron Armstead, they have a great player, right? But he suffers through injuries. He has those problems. And Miami is going all out this season. What happens if Teron Armstead goes down for the year? Or with any other organization? Well, they need a guy. And I think it's very possible that they go look for someone who has started recently, who is going to be healthy at that time. Cam Robinson is going to have a limited amount of snaps already in the year, so he should be ready to go at that point. And say, hey, let's give you a third or a fourth. Maybe it's not that much, but we'll give you something for him. I think that's very much in the cards. And I think Jacksonville has to consider something like that because you can go find a tackle in free agency. Get a guy who is maybe older that just isn't signed on yet, like a Jason Peters, and go sign him to a contract for the rest of the year. Hope he plays well if he has to go in. But, it is a risk. I think you can make the argument that they don't do this for that reason. But I think the Jaguars overall would come out of this better. Because, for one, you're going to get a draft pick if you trade him. You will not get one if Cam Robinson sticks with the team and you release him at the end of this season in the offseason. Because when you release a player, compensatory picks don't apply. So they would have to wait out the rest of his contract to get that done. It's just not feasible for the team because he's going to cost so much, and they're going to have to try to re-sign players to the salary cap or under the salary cap. So I don't really think it's a great idea for them to keep him around the whole year, but I think it's good. Keep him right now. He's not costing him anything. See how the guys perform. If you have struggles at tackle, then yeah, keep him around this season. Go figure out something in the offseason. Because you do need to have your best guys on the field. But I think the Jaguars can figure out something for that backup position if they move on from Cam Robinson. You free up money, and you're looking really good heading into the next offseason. It just makes too much sense for me, and I think that team is going to come knocking and ask for Cam Robinson to be traded to them. So we'll move on now, and we'll do our last little topic about the trade deadline here. I think whether or not it happens, that Jacksonville is going to be heavily interested in trading for someone at the trade deadline. I don't think this team's going to be perfect throughout the first half of the season. I think there is going to be a problem that arises. I don't know what it is, but I think a player, like every year, is going to become available for teams to trade for to try to upgrade and make a push at the Super Bowl. And we did see it this offseason where although the Jaguars didn't make any big moves after the Calvin Ridley trade in the middle of last year, I do think that the Jaguars very clearly showed that they are interested in those moves if they become available. And so the big example that we've talked about on here is Darius Slay. Now, Darius Slay never got released. He never actually hit the market, but there were negotiations from other teams with him before he was released because those were allowed. And so teams such as Jacksonville and Chicago went after him very early in the process, tried to get him on board. Ultimately, Baltimore was the one he was going to go to, but he was not traded. He was not released. He signed a new contract with the Eagles, stuck around, and that's how it was dealt with. But you see it, the Jaguars are interested. And then you see it once again when you get to the Danielle Hunter stuff that was going on, a month ago at this point. They were interested at that time, and I think still will be when the trade deadline comes around, in getting another pass rusher, getting someone who can upgrade the room, whether they start or whether they're rotational, or you just have three guys who have a lot of snaps. Because that's the way it could end up going. If someone becomes available like that, Jacksonville is going to be interested. They're going to try to make a move for someone. The question is whether or not they will make a move for them, because we will see some lopsided trades. We will see teams give up too much to compete this year. And I think when you look at Trent Baalke's trade history, especially what he did in the draft this last year, he is a bargain hunter. He's always going for the trade that he believes will absolutely benefit his team more than the other. He's very stingy on it. And it worked really well during the draft, but when you're going after guys like Danielle Hunter, you have to do a little bit more to get him. And I'm not sure that Baalke's going to offer enough to get a deal like that done, but I think he is going to be interested and try to pursue it. Maybe gets a little out of his comfort zone. I don't think it'll end up happening, but I think you're going to hear about it, and Jacksonville trying to make a move for someone at the trade deadline. So now that we've talked about the players, we're going to talk about what we think is going to happen with this team. And this is the first big, bold prediction. And I think there's a very good chance that I'd probably actually give it the exact same chance that the playoffs run through Arrowhead once again. I think that the way the season is going to go, I think Jacksonville's going to get it done in week 2. I think it's going to be a really close, emotional game. I think Jacksonville is going to end up winning at the last moment. I think it's going to be a great game. But I think after that point, that Kansas City is going to just start going on a roll. I don't think that they're going to fall late in the season, despite the hard schedule, because they do have a lot of disadvantages with the amount of rest they have before games compared to their opponents, all that. But they're still going to be strong early in the year, too. Kansas City will lose some games, but they're going to finish the season with a lot of wins. And Jacksonville's going to have to play their absolute best to get the first seed. But everything you hear from this team in the interviews, the talk online, Jacksonville's focused. They're not looking at the glory. They're not looking at, oh, this person said we're going to go make the Super Bowl. They know it's one game at a time. We have to win each week. Every opponent matters. And I think you're going to see it come down to the wire where Jacksonville is going to have the tiebreaker because of that week 2 matchup where I just think they're going to want it a little more than Kansas City. I think both teams are going to compete hard, but I just think it's going to mean a little more for Jacksonville, for the fans, because obviously they were the ones who didn't win the Super Bowl. But I think after that point, both these teams are going to have the same amount of wins roughly, and it may come down to a game in Nashville for the Jaguars to pull it off. And that same week, Kansas City's going on the road in Los Angeles. They play the Cincinnati Bengals at Arrowhead the week before. I think it's going to be a gauntlet at the end of the year, and I think both teams are going to come out strong. I think they're going to win most of those games, if not all of them. But I think Jacksonville is going to squeak it out and hopefully be the first team to finally force the Chiefs to go on the road in the playoffs and not have their home field advantage all the way through. Because what we've seen is they either get the first seed or they get the second, and a team like Baltimore or Tennessee gets first and loses. And that's the last thing that the AFC needs this year, because they're just asking for a repeat of what happened last year. But I think Jacksonville could get it done. You can look at Cincinnati as well, but I'm going to put my money on Jax. I think this is going to be a special year. I think they're the ones who are finally going to do it and not lose in the divisional round. And then we get to the final penultimate game. Actually, no, we won't. We'll do that after this. We'll get to that after. Before I talk about that, the other thing I want to mention is we talk about MVP, we talk about Coach of the Year, all these things, and we want to predict Jaguars for him. I do think that the Jaguars are going to put up performances that could earn the MVP, that could earn Coach of the Year, that could earn Comeback Player of the Year, whatever the award is. I do not think they're going to win it. I cannot imagine a world where the NFL and its employees or voters or whoever really makes the decision is going to actually sit down and say that they want Trevor Lawrence to win MVP or they think Doug Peterson's the best coach. We saw it clear as day last year when you have two guys who are clearly at the front of the race in Brian Daboll and Doug Peterson. And I still believe that Doug Peterson did more because he took a team that was worst in the league 2 years in a row, had the worst head coach in the history of the NFL, in the middle of a season that looked like it turned south a long time ago, ran it all the way through, won a ton of games, won 5 in a row to make the playoffs. And the way they did it was incredible. Compared to a team that started out very strong, surprised a ton of people, but did fall off at the end of the season. I think, if I remember correctly, I think they almost got blown out the final week, or it was around that point. I mean, they were not performing well in games. They did go on in Minnesota. They did play well, but, I mean, the Giants didn't exactly go down with a massive fight in the playoffs. You look at the wild card round, right after we lost, they got blown out by Philadelphia. But that team and that coach, you look at the voting, it was not even close between Daboll and Doug Peterson. Not even a competition. So much, in fact, that Peterson was not even the second guy. So when I look back at that and I'm thinking about it and like considering, can the Jaguars actually win an award? Hell no. There's no way the NFL is going to allow that. Lawrence is going to have to break some kind of crazy NFL record for it to even be a possibility. And I don't know if that's going to happen this year. I think someone else is going to be great. You could see a Joe Burrow be great. You could see another head coach just have a fantastic year. And they're going to side with the other guy 10 out of 10 times. So as much as we want to be excited about it, I just don't think it's going to happen. I'm not looking forward to it. If it happens, I'll be pleasantly surprised. This team is not going to be acknowledged, though. They're not going to get accolades, nor do they need them. Because that's just the way they operate. Jacksonville is the team that's forgotten. So, that'll probably be the way it goes. But now, moving forward with the playoffs, I believe that the Jaguars, for the first time in franchise history this year, will end up making the Super Bowl. And I think it's going to be a fantastic game. I think it's one that could go any way. But, of course, if it's 50-50 or 55-45, whatever it is, I'm going to side with the Jaguars, especially this year. Because I think this is going to be the year for them. In the future, like if they win the Super Bowl, yeah, we're probably not going to predict them to win every year. Because other teams are going to come out and want it more. But Jacksonville is in that group right now. This team's never gone to the Super Bowl. They have a great story. They have great players. They have a ton of potential. They're ridden off by the NFL. Everyone wants to talk about the Jets, the Lions, the Chiefs, whatever other team it may be. And the Chiefs are the only one out of those who's actually earned it, and very clearly earned it. But I think Jacksonville's ready for this game. I think that whether it's played in Jacksonville or Arrowhead, both of these teams are going to come out to fight. I think there's going to be a very clear purpose for both of them. And they're going to know they have to give it their best. I think it's going to come down to the wire. I think it could come down to overtime. And I think Jacksonville is going to sneak it out with a crazy Trevor Lawrence drive, whatever it may be. But if I'm making my exact prediction for how I think it's going to go down, I think the Jaguars are going to beat the Chiefs in overtime to advance to the Super Bowl. And last year, before they were good, I did say I thought the Jaguars would make it to the divisional round and lose to the Kansas City Chiefs. So hopefully I'm right again, because we love that, because we want to go see our team make the Super Bowl and win it as well. And that's the last part of this. That's my last prediction. I think the Jaguars are going to get the Super Bowl this year for the first time ever, and they're going to win it. I believe it's going to happen. I think they're going to probably go up against a very tough opponent because I think the Eagles are going to go back. I don't think there's another team in the NFC that clearly is good enough to beat them at this point. Someone's got to prove it. I hope someone steps up because I don't want to face a team that just lost the Super Bowl off a quarterback who had the best performance maybe ever in the game. That does scare me as a fan. But even if the Eagles make it, and they have all that reason to win, I think Jacksonville's going to have the same thing. I think it's two great teams. I think they're going to fight to the end, and I think that Doug Peterson is going to get it done. I think he can do it this year. I hope he does. I think this is the first year the Jaguars win a Super Bowl and have that parade downtown. I hope they do. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's where I'm going to lay my eggs this season, or put my eggs in that basket. That makes more sense. So we'll see what happens. But I have high hopes for this year. And I think there's plenty of reason to have high hopes. You see it among the entire fan base. People who follow this team, even not the fans, that know what's going on, understand that this should be an amazing year for the Jaguars. Maybe something goes wrong. It is entirely possible. I'm not sitting here saying it's more likely than not that they win the Super Bowl. At the end of the day, no team has over a 50% chance of making it. But if I'm going to put my money on anyone this season, I feel like the Jaguars are the story that makes the most sense, are the team that makes the most sense, and they have the players and the coaches to go get it done along with the willpower to do it. I think they're disciplined. I think many of their problems they moved on from. They have young talent that's going to step up. And when it comes push to shove, I think they're going to get it done. I think they're going to play great football, and they're going to make some memories this year. But that's all I've got to say. I appreciate you guys watching. We'll have, hopefully, another video up before the Colts game, do some predictions for that. I don't know how in detail we'll go with those. I have not done them before, but we'll see. Spoiler alert, though, I think the Jaguars are going to win. I think they're better, possibly. So we'll see what happens, but hopefully we'll have that up either tomorrow or on Saturday before the game. But enjoy this weekend, guys. It's NFL football again. We got a great game tonight. You know, root for whoever you want. I'm going to root that our competitor loses, obviously, because I want any kind of advantage we can get this year. But I think it's going to be a great one, and it's going to be an exciting year for the Jaguars and for the rest of the NFL. So thank you all for watching. Enjoy the weekend. Have a great time. And finally, go Jags.